What the do you mean? What am I talking about?
Out here talking
You! Minor league motherfucker is what you are.
I'll tell you guys something right now. It's not easy to be a champion, all right? It's the hardest thing there is to do. Are you guys that good? You're not. I'll tell you that right the now. Wise up. Buddy, go ahead and say what the you want to say.
Welcome aboard. It's this week's episode of 86, the Wally Backman Show. And there is our guy right there. Now, I want to let you folks know I'm Bruce Jacobs, by the way. Thanks for tuning in this week. We've got the great voice of the New York Mets, Gary Cohen, coming up in just a few minutes for you. But I also want you to know that our guy right there, Wally Backman, has been traveling from coast to coast. And despite the fact that he's a little stuffy and everything, he is here today. Wally, good to see you. How are you, brother?
I'm doing good. I'm a little under the weather, Bruce, but I feel good. I'm looking forward to our show today.
Now, you were in New York for a card show, correct?
No, I went to New York on Saturday. Was supposed to come home on Sunday, and I never got home until Tuesday because of all the rain and all that kind of stuff. So it was a disaster. You know what it's like to take an extra pair of clothes. You're only going to be there one day to fly out the next day. And so I had to go buy a couple of shirts, some socks, some underwear, you name it, because I couldn't get out of there till Tuesday. But hey, I'm home now. It feels great to get home. I'm looking forward this week to go back down on the coast and go fishing.
All right, well, it's been an interesting week for the Mets. Let's get right to some high heat, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Wally, couple of things on tap before we get to Gary Cohen, the voice of the New York Mets. Let's start out, take a look at some of the pennant races where the Mets find themselves as we hit this week's episode. They take 2 out of 3 from Baltimore, 2 walk-off wins, which were just epic. They find themselves a game and a half behind the Braves with distance between them and the Padres and the Diamondbacks, 2 teams that are about to see on this current road trip. Wally, as we enter into this road trip, what do you find as far as your thoughts on where the Mets are at?
Well, I mean, it's all based on pitching. I know that the Mets on the last trip I think they swept the Padres. So, that's a good thing if they can continue to do that. This is a very important trip for them. Pitching is always going to be the key. The one kid that I've talked about in our first podcast was about this Brandon Sproat, and I see that they're going to shut this kid down, and I just can't figure out why they're shutting the kid down. He's thrown 95 and a third innings this year. The year before, he threw 106 innings. So normally with a pitcher, you can increase him by about 20%, but to shut this kid down, I know he's gone through the system very fast, but maybe because they really believe he's a real big prospect, they want to do this, which is fine. But it wasn't necessary to shut this kid down.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, Wally, instead of shutting him down, and I agree, I do not understand the decision. I mean, maybe there's a fatigue problem that we don't know about, but as all things that we do know about, wouldn't it have been beneficial to at least bring him up in September so he could get a taste of the big leagues? He's the number 1 pitching prospect, as you have illustrated many times. Wouldn't just giving him a taste, sitting in a major league dugout for a few weeks, if not used that much, but just getting a flavor of what the big leagues, isn't that better than shutting him down?
I think it's a big thing, especially for a player that a lot of people don't understand. Even if you brought this kid to the big leagues, you got to pay him a little bit of money. Money's never the issue in baseball anymore, but to let him sit in that dugout with some of those veteran guys to get a little bit established with what's going on at the major league level, it's a huge thing for a young player.
Yeah. Also, I mean, if he steps in September, he's not eligible for the postseason roster should the Mets make it. But, with the current situation, the bullpen is still a little shaky. The starting pitching has been okay. It's been okay, but you never know where this guy could have stepped in, and especially when they expand the rosters to 40 on September 1, he could have stepped in. I just do not. I do not understand the wisdom of just shutting a guy down. Just doesn't make any sense to me.
It's
Unless,
always based on innings. It could be 95 innings of tough innings too. Where it's sometimes the guy throws 150 innings, guy throws 100 innings, the guy throws 150 innings. It's easier innings for the guy that threw 100 innings. So they must have a reason for it, and so be it. There's next year, but you know what? When you got a chance to win, you got to go balls to the walls.
totally agree, Wally. Is that a decision? If you can try to, knowing the Mets hierarchy, is this a decision made by David Stearns, the GM of the big league club? Is this made on the minor league level? Is it both levels coordinating with each other? Who makes this decision?
I think it's both levels. You have your pitching coordinator. You got David Stern. They're looking at how many innings the guy pitched the year before. But I think the one thing that I've noticed since David has come there is it seems like they're working together. So if your scouting system, your front office system, your player personnel system, if they work together, that's how you create a dynasty, because you have to work together to become really good. And it seems like that's what they're doing from looking from the outside in.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about a little bit about this current trip. It's San Diego for 4, and you mentioned it. The Mets swept the Padres earlier in the year. So if they beat the Padres one game, if they finish tied, and the Padres have, I think, a 6-game lead, or they lost last night, 5.5-game lead over the Mets. If they finish tied, whoever wins the season series, as we've illustrated, so the Mets have to win one game. They need to win more in San Diego to win the season series. Then they go to Arizona. For my money, Wally, right now the Diamondbacks are the best team in the National League. Their young talent is playing exceptionally well, and really every facet of the game, from defense to speed to starting pitching, they're getting effective, very effective closing from this kid Jose Martinez. I think that's a tough 3 games, and then you go play the White Sox, which the pressure of the White Sox series, Wally, is not losing to that team. The Yankees nutted up. Okay, they got buried. Chicago couldn't believe it. The Yankees lost to the White Sox. First game of the series, like 12-2. You'd have thought the world was coming to it. How did the White Sox beat the Yankees? It's 1 out of 162 games. But the pressure to beat a team that's so awful, maybe you can talk about that and touch on each of these 3 opponents.
Well, any bad team can beat a good team. There's a reason there's 162 games in a regular season, and yeah, you don't want to be that team that gets beat by the White Sox. But going back to the start, this Padres series, the Diamondback series, for the Mets, if they could go in there and win 4 out of 6 games, it would be huge for the Mets. It's going to probably bring them up into the wild card standings and things like that. We know the Braves are hurt, but they're still pretty good. How, I don't know, but I think it's very important for them to win 4 of the next 6 games.
Okay. It's actually 7. 4 in San Diego, day off Monday, 3 in Arizona. Would you say they have to go at least 4-3 in those 7? Or if they go 3-4 and then turn around and wallop the White Sox, am I too caught up in the numbers of the record? Because to me, they've got to win. You want to bring the Padres and the Diamondbacks back to you a little bit. So, if the Braves start to take off right now, that's the team that's closest to the Mets. And they're the only chase team because the Diamondbacks are up 6, and I think the Padres are up 5 or 5.5 on the Mets. So I think you really want to bring those teams back to your pack.
I think you have to. Bruce. You got to bring them back down to your earth, so there's more competition and everything's more important at that time.
Yeah. Wally, your teams that you played on as you got later in the season, did you find yourself as you got into September, especially in 84 and 85 when there was a pennant race? 86, you blew the doors off of everybody. And really, by the end of May, it was pretty much Katie by the door. But as you got into September, did you feel your team getting more excited in 84 and 85? Or did you sense a little bit of nervousness, a little bit of apprehension? I mean, this is a team that, for the first time in a while is contending. Give me the atmosphere that you played in 84 and 85 in September.
Well, I think that we felt a little more pressure because we knew we were getting better. And the outcome of all the games meant something, which was very important. It hadn't meant anything for a long time in New York, but the guys, we wanted to win. And when we got Davey Johnson as a manager, it made a huge difference. So his expectations were high. Our expectations were high. And it's really because of Davey that made those expectations that high for us. So we expected to win back then.
Okay, so you went into September, and I didn't sense any apprehension, nervousness. Now this is year 4 for you, 84. Year 85 was your 5th year, so you're not just a rookie. The young players, did you see a change in the young players when the calendar flipped from August to September?
You're always waiting to see who the young guys are. The young guys are always trying to push the veterans out. So, you take a look at those guys, and when you bring those guys up and they get some playing time, I'm thinking of guys like Dave Maganin. He took off and ran with it. He could hit. But you look at some of those guys, and are they going to be able to help us get to the next level? And guys like Dave Maganin, Kevin Mitchell, when he came up, those guys were able to help us get to the next level. Outside of that, I think the 2 biggest additions that Frank Cashin made was bringing in Keith Hernandez and Gary Carter. Those were 2 spots that we needed filled, and I think that made us a complete team.
All right, you ready? Now, Wally, I know you grew up wanting to play. Of course, I grew up wanting to play, and then at a very early age realized I couldn't. Thankfully, you never realized that and ascended all the way to the big leagues. However, I was keenly interested in the broadcast booth, and I can't thank you enough because in mere moments, you have set up the Hall of Fame, and he is in the Mets Hall of Fame, and I think someday we'll win the Ford Frick Award and get to the Cooperstown, the National Hall of Fame. Wally Backman has booked Gary Cohen for today's program. Do you know Gary Cohen?
I do know Gary. We've talked and been with each other in spring training, but he's a fantastic guy. He is a sick baseball fanatic. He was a Met fan when he was a kid, but he has done such a wonderful job for the Mets that I can't praise him enough.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Wally, the last thing, your 2 ex-mates, Ronnie and Keith, this is really a great booth. I mean, the chemistry is awesome. The chemistry between, I don't know if they were friends when you guys played, Ron and Keith. They certainly sound like good friends now. And, each has their own way. But, man, it's a special booth. If the team played as good as the booth did every night, we might not ever lose a game. So thanks to you, we have Gary Cohen. And I think everybody's really excited about that. So coming up, ladies and gentlemen, the Hall of Fame voice, Mets Hall of Fame, and hopefully someday Cooperstown Hall of Fame, Gary Cohen. It's 86, the Wally Backman Show.
I fell in love with the Mets from my first experience at Shea Stadium. The grandeur of that ballpark. The sound of James Jarvis.
Okay, welcome back as promised. The Hall of Fame voice of the New York Mets, also of Seton Hall basketball, and he is Gary Cohen. He joins us here on 86, the Wally Backman Show. Gary, great pleasure to have you and to meet you. You know Wally, I'm Bruce. Thanks for some time as you hit the road to San Diego.
Thanks very much for having me. I look forward to it.
So I could begin with the broadcast, and we'll cover that. But I have to begin with 10-year-old Kingston. Because let me tell you, man, Gary, if I'm an owner, and you can explain more to our listeners and our viewers, and I know this is not a brand new idea, but if I'm an owner of any of the 29 other baseball teams, I have my entire staff in and say, I want this. I want this segment once per whatever. Young Kingston was unbelievable. He looks like he owns a yacht, and he's smarter than, well, for me, for sure. And I won't speak for you guys, but man, that was really great stuff.
Well, first of all, Kingston is only 9, so even
9.
better. Yeah, this is something we've been doing with SNY for about a dozen years. It's gotten a little more traction over the last few years, and what I've been noticing is that every year the kids come in a little more polished. A lot of them have been to broadcasting camps, um, and Kingston was definitely the best we've ever had. He was funny. He was spot on. He was prepared. He was interactive. It was great, and we always have a ball with it, and this was no exception.
Yeah. Can a 59-year-old qualify in some shape or form?
I
Because, I speak for a lot of people out there, men and women, who would say, we wanted your job, but obviously it's in good hands. But I wouldn't mind living a fantasy of doing half an inning with Keith and Ron over my back as well.
Yeah, I don't know what the age limit is, but perhaps we can put together a broadcasting fantasy camp for
Ooh,
folks like yourself. You know that might work out.
I like it. I like it. Gary, you started with the Mets in 1989. Up until then, I know you did some minor leagues, but did you at any point while working your way up think, boy, I don't know if I'm going to be able to ascend to that level? Was there ever
Yeah.
any self doubt?
Oh yeah, virtually every day. There's no path for a broadcaster to get to the big leagues. It's not like a player who's in a particular team's minor league system and whose interests the organization is out to promote. You're very much a free agent. You're very much at the mercy of the people who do the hiring for major league teams or major league networks. So yeah, there's doubt every day. I mean, I know a lot of people who spent 20, 30, 40 years doing minor league baseball who never got an opportunity. I was very, very fortunate. I did 3 years of minor league baseball and got my chance with the Mets. Um, I would have been thrilled to have gotten a call from any major league team, but the fact that it was the one I grew up rooting for was just so far over the top, and I've never stopped appreciating that opportunity over the last 36 years.
So, Gary, when did you decide in life that you wanted to be a broadcaster? Because you are fantastic. But when did you decide? I go back to my playing days, and somebody said to me when I was 15 years old, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to play in the major leagues." So, how did it come about? I see that you got political science was your major or whatever in college and things like that, but that's really not broadcasting, is it?
No, my first desire was like yours, but by 15, I realized that I had no chance. I wanted to be the shortstop for the Mets. I wanted to be Bud Harrelson. That was my hero. Um, um, Lacking that, I wanted to be a power forward for the Knicks, but I stopped growing and didn't have the ball handling skills to be a guard. Um, so yeah, I think I always admired broadcasters. I got an AM radio in my bedroom, old thing with a big box with tubes in it that took 20 seconds to warm up. And I discovered baseball and other sports on the radio. Marv Albert was my broadcasting hero. And when I was a kid, he was doing the home games for the Knicks and the Rangers. And I listened to those virtually every night. I listened to Bob Murphy and Ralph Kiner and Lindsey Nelson doing the Mets, and Frank Messer and those people doing the Yankees, and tried to find distant signals of other games. So I was very much into the idea of listening to games on the radio. That was a big part of my childhood, but I never really considered that it was an option to actually do that for a living until I got to college and discovered that there was such a thing as college radio and the opportunity to do play by play for the first time. And once I started and got the bug, it became very much what I wanted to do. Um, but it wasn't a straight line by any means. When I got out of college, my first job in radio was working at a 1,000-watt radio station in Lebanon, New Hampshire, doing the news. Um, I moved to South Carolina to take a sports job and did some high school play by play and a couple of minor league games here and there. But it wasn't until I was 5 years out of school that I got to do minor league baseball on a full time basis. And so I mean, I wanted to be around sports. That was my goal, and this was my path in. So, but who knew that it was going to be a lifetime pursuit?
Yeah. So 1989, you get into the radio booth, and I'm thinking about it this way. If I were doing the games, there's a couple of teams growing up a hardcore Met fan like you that I really don't like. Okay, I can name them because I don't have to worry about being on the broadcast. The Phillies, the Yankees. My question to you is if you had a team or two you did not like, and then you were in the booth and you were recording, you were doing the game against that team, how hard is it for you to leave any bias off?
People ask me all the time, how do you keep from screaming and yelling when the Mets win, or you know booing or whatever it is that fans do? And I think that you channel that through the words that you're using to describe the game, um, whether that's a full description on the radio or captions that we provide on television. I think that I love the Mets, but mostly I love the game and I love the competition and I love the nuances of it. And I've grown up trying to learn as much about the game as I can, and I try to learn more every day. And that's what it's all about. It's about conveying that to people who are either listening or watching. And um, I don't think that fandom really enters into that. I think that you know, get a little more excited for a Mets success than you do for the other team's success. But um, for the most part, it's finding the right words to match the moment.
Interesting. I don't know if you saw this, Gary, but Awful Announcing had a great article yesterday. I want to know how you handle this. Bruce Shine, who's a talk show host, works, I think, CBS Sports Network, said you were our generation's Vin Scully. How do you handle that kind of a comment? That's quite that is as good a compliment as you can get.
Vince Scully is unmatched. There has never been anybody who has attempted to do this job who doesn't revere Vinny as the best who's ever been, and we miss him terribly. Um, to be in the same conversation with Vinny is beyond my comprehension. I just try to do the best I can every day, and
Gary, I'll
let
tell
the
you
chips
something.
fall where they may. You
You're pretty damn good.
let other people.
You're pretty damn good.
Well, thanks, but I think that as with anything, you have to accomplish what you try to set out to, and let other people make those judgment calls. It's true in sports. It's true in every area of pursuit. Whether you're in a movie star, a doctor, whatever you are, Um, let others make those calls. But it's certainly gratifying to hear people say stuff like that.
Nice.
Okay.
Well,
I'm
so what
sorry,
do you
Wally. I
think, Gary?
apologize. You go ahead. My
I
bad.
know this is a pretty big trip for the Mets on the West Coast this week. Um, I've rooted for them since I said it on a podcast the other day. Since when I was 10 years old, I was the only kid in my house with one TV that was rooting for the Mets in 1969. Um, can they pull this out? Do they got enough pitching to pull it out to get to that wild card?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the issue. I think their lineup is solid, and getting Sterling Marte back only gives them more depth. Um, but they've been inconsistent offensively. They've gone through stretches where they have been phenomenal. They had a 6 week stretch in June and early July where they were scoring 7 runs a game, and it was able to overcome whatever pitching problems they had. But there have been stretches where that really hasn't been the case, and um, the question is definitely about pitching. I think we knew that going into the season. Um, Once Kodai Senga went down in spring training and makes one start all year, they had no real ace. But I think that David Stearns did an amazing job identifying pitchers who had upside. And Luis Severino and Sean Manaea have both been way better than I think most in the industry expected them to be this year. Um, Mania worked a lot in relief for the Giants last year, and Sevy really hasn't pitched this many innings since 2018. So there's going to be a question about how they survived the last 6 weeks and whether the innings catch up to them. Um, and then you had Edwin Diaz coming back from injury, and then he got suspended, and then he had a rough stretch where he couldn't save a game. And the bullpen has almost completely turned over since the beginning of the season. So that's been a concern. So I think it's very much up in the air. I mean, the Padres and the Diamondbacks have both been playing just out of their minds since the All-Star break, and they have established themselves as the top two wildcard teams, and really are even putting pressure on the Dodgers in the West. The Braves, to me, are the most remarkable story because they've had every reason to break down with all the injuries they've had, with Acuna out for the year and Strider out for the year and Albies out, and now Riley's hurt. But somehow they have managed to keep their heads above water. Marcelo Zuna is having a year that I just did not envision him having. And they have survived so far, and they're still ahead of the Mets in the standings. So I think it's going to be a fascinating last 6 weeks. I don't think there's a dominant team. Everybody expected the Dodgers to be the dominant team in the National League this year, and it just hasn't worked out that way because they've had so many pitching injuries, and it's really brought them back to the pack. So the short answer is that I think that every team that's in competition for these spots right now has a shot, but I don't think any team is overwhelmingly the favorite to hold down a spot.
It's interesting, Gary, because the last road trip that the Mets were on, Wally identified that as a key road trip, and it was, and they didn't really fare that well. When you lose 2 out of 3 to a poor Angels team, that sort of thing. But this trip, to me, because right now the only catchable team right on their heels is the Braves. You want to bring the Padres and the Diamondbacks back to you so you have other spots you can chase. And if they win one game against the Padres, then they win the season series against them, which would give them the tiebreaker. And they're 2-2 with the Diamondbacks. And then they finish this trip up with the woeful White Sox. To me, this will be the make or break trip. And I think they have to win at least 6 of these games, if not 7, to really. I mean, they could catch the Braves. They could, very much could. But I think you'd rather have more teams to try to catch than just one. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the last trip, just the fact that they were able to survive it was fairly amazing. I mean, I've never had a road trip like that in 36 years, from Anaheim to St. Louis to Denver to Seattle to back home. And the Seattle pitching staff was just overwhelming in that last series, and they were out of gas. Um, they stumbled at home as well against Oakland and Miami, and uh, had a couple of dramatic wins in the last series against Baltimore. So I don't think there's any way to predict exactly what's going to happen. I mean, the Braves are in a stretch where they're playing the Phillies 7 times in 13 days. So, even if the Mets have a 5-5 road trip or even a 4-6 road trip, they might be in exactly the same position they were. I mean, they just had a 5-4 homestand, which was a disappointment, and they lost one game in the standings to the Braves. So I think that there's a lot still to be shaken out. The Mets still have to play Atlanta the last week in the season. They've got the Phillies, they've got the Red Sox, they've got a number of teams, and they finished the season in Milwaukee. And you assume the Brewers will have clinched by then, and that's going to have an impact. So there are a lot of big series coming up, but certainly they can't afford to go 2-8 on this road trip because that would probably doom them.
So, Gary, let me, and I'd like to get both of your perspectives on this. Give me your thoughts as to the job that Steve Cohen has done so far as the owner. I personally, as a fan, not a fanboy, but a fan, I think he's done pretty much exactly what he said. He spent a lot of dough last year. A lot of it was, didn't turn out very productive. We know what happened with Scherzer and Verlander and everything. And I think they made the right pivot. Instead of just throwing more money and chasing after more free agents to try to beef up that minor league system with with better quality, from both of your standpoints, Wally, you as well, how would you rate as far as Steve Cohen and the job he's done as owner, and has he lived up to everything that he said he would do as he was in the process of buying the club?
I'll go first, Gary, if you don't mind. I think he's done a great job. I think he realized that you can't buy a winner. There's so many different adversities that go into baseball, chemistry, things like that, how players play together. But I think that he realized that his new general manager, I think back and I think there's only 12 guys on the roster from opening day. So he's done a wonderful job rebuilding his team, bringing in guys like Iglesias, Martinez, giving Vientos a chance to play, to show what he could really do, because I know they really did. They were trying to push Beatty big time, and Vientos was always the guy that was getting pushed back a little bit. But for this kid to come in and have, you don't even have 300 at bats, he's got 20 some home runs now. I mean, he's pretty impressive.
Your thoughts on Steve Cohen so far,
I
Gary?
would, yeah, I would say that here's the bottom line. I'll start with that. When you have the most money of any owner, which he does, that's a good thing, right?
Right.
You have the money to outspend mistakes. You have the money to go out and outbid other teams for the big ticket items that you want. But the two most important things that Steve has done over the last year or so, one was at the trading deadline last year, recognizing that this team was not going anywhere and using his money to buy prospects. Because that's basically what they did when they traded Verlander and Scherzer and picked up their salaries. They were able to bring in a Luis Angel Acuna, bring in a Drew Gilbert, bring in a Ryan Clifford. So they've done that. At the same time, they've done a wonderful job of revamping the Mets' development tools, including putting together a pitching lab in Port St. Lucie. The Mets were behind the curve in that area. But I think the most important thing that Steve did was he was patient in bringing in the president of baseball operations that he wanted. He couldn't get David Stearns for the previous 2 years, so he waited and he was able to secure David. And David is one of the great minds in the game. And the fact that he was coming from a small market where he had to recognize value and couldn't outspend others has given him skills. And we've seen it. We mentioned it with Severino and Minaya buying low on guys who had big upsides. Iglesias, kind of fell into their lap, and that's great. They lost Ronnie Mauricio, so they gave Beatty a shot at third base because it would have been Mauricio's job had he not blown out his knee. And then Vientos took over, and they've been willing to eat contracts where they've had to, acknowledge that guys are not performing, and give different guys chances. And that's how you develop a winning culture. And it's going in the right direction. This may or may not be the year they win a championship, but they have definitely, created an organizational structure that gives them a chance to be competitive and play at a championship caliber level every year. So I think that between Steve and David, they have done a magnificent job of recreating this organization.
I would definitely
Interesting.
agree with you.
Sorry, Wally, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I'm just agreeing with him about what they have done to make this organization a better organization. Finally, it's been a long time since it was a great organization, but finally to see these people do the things they're doing, there's hope. And so, that's the only way you can create a dynasty.
So let me ask you, Gary. Wally and I have discussed this. I'm going to ask you about a couple of players. You give me your thoughts. What do you do with Jose Butto? I saw where the Mets said they would continue to bring him out as a long reliever. I mean, for me, Gary, he's been the best pitcher on the staff really all year. Then he goes down and gets hurt, but start, bullpen. I mean, the guy has just been incredible. I would be an advocate of maybe pulling Jose Quintana out of the rotation, and you lose the left-hander, of course, which you like, but I don't know. You use Budo for 2 innings, and then you can't use him for a couple of days. It just seems like that's an untapped asset. I would want to tap that a little bit more. Your thoughts on Jose Butto, and how would you fit him into the schedule the rest of the season, and where?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult situation because at this point he has been working in 1 and 2 inning stints for several months, and it would take a while to ramp him back up to be a starting pitcher. So I think that ship has sailed for the rest of this season, and I think they're just going to have to work within the parameters that they have for him. Um, he's had a little trouble bouncing back. You'd love to be able to work him back to back days, or if he pitches 2 innings, bring him back the second day. But they've had to give him extra days, no question, because he just doesn't have the experience bouncing back as a reliever. I think down the road, there's every chance that he goes back to starting. But I think that because of the ramp up that would be necessary over the next few weeks to get him back to be able to pitch the number of innings he'd have to be a starter, I don't think that's an option for this year. The good news is that the Mets should have Daniel Nunez back, and he was their best relief pitcher before he went down. He pitched on Tuesday, pitched a good inning in rehab, and I think the plan is to activate him, if not tonight, then tomorrow, and that's a big piece for them.
We're joined by Gary Cohen. It's 86, the Wally Backman Show. Gary in San Diego as the Mets begin an epic or a huge 10-game road trip. 4 in San Diego starting on Thursday, 3 in Arizona, and then 3 at the Chicago White Sox. 2 more players I want. What do you do with Jose Iglesias? To me, it's set up as a no. I cannot believe this 34, 35-year-old guy, beating around, looking for an opportunity. You could make a case he's the MVP. What do you do with him beyond this year? And also, of course, this question's coming. What does Gary Cohen do with Pete Alonso?
Well, let's start with Iglesias. I mean, just the fact that he's back in the big leagues this year, he has played with the enthusiasm of a rookie. I mean, the fact that nobody took a chance on him last year, I never really understood that. He had a good year in Colorado 2 years ago. He's always had great hands, doesn't have fantastic range, which is why the defensive metrics don't rate him as high as your eyeballs do, because he's just a magician with the glove. And the fact that he's hitting over 330 is a phenomenal thing, and he's been great. But I don't think he's a full time player going forward. He's an extra piece. He's a fifth infielder, and that's great. And if he wants to sign back to be that next year, then I think certainly he'd be welcome back. He's been a huge positive influence in that clubhouse. As far as Alonso is concerned, the problem is the price point, right? I mean, right-handed batting, 30-year-old power hitting, slow-footed first baseman have been devalued in the modern baseball market. Um, I think that if you're left-handed like Matt Olson or Freddie Freeman, you're valued more highly. Um, I think that Pete has a fantastic connection with the Mets fan base, but I don't think that this front office is going to be sentimental. I think that they're going to be um, looking at the bottom line and looking at what is reasonable. And if Pete's looking for 9 years at $30 million a year, he's not getting the Aaron Judge contract. He's just not. And if you I mean, to me, the Mets are better off with Pete Alonso than
Hmm.
without him. But if they were to plan for a life without him, you've got Mark Vientos who can move across the diamond. You've got Mauricio coming back. They still have belief in Brett Beatty. They've got other pieces. So I don't think that they're going to, go beyond market rate, or at least not too much further beyond market rate to sign him. And then it's a matter of Pete and Scott Boras and what their expectations are, and that meeting what the Mets are willing to do. Because I think that all things being equal, everybody would like to have Pete for the long term as a Met.
No, I
Wally, you
agree
got
with you.
something?
I agree with you, Gary. I think that Pete would be great with the Mets, but Boris is a tough guy probably to work with. But they do have pieces, and then those pieces they're good pieces. So I mean, they have options. So and like I said before, that's how you build an organization to where you have those pieces. I mean, you look at the Cardinals aren't the same as they once were, but they've always been competitive going throughout their own system, and it's going to be nice to see the Mets, if they continue to do what they're doing, to be able to use their own organization to get the pieces that they need.
Gary Cohen joining us from San Diego on the Wally 86, the Wally Backman Show, and then to Arizona and Chicago, which will then get him into September, and of course, the epic stretch run. Wally, I want to ask you this question, and it's leading to a question for Gary. When you played with Keith Hernandez and Ron Darling, did you see broadcaster? Did you see broadcaster as either one of their futures?
I seen it in Ronnie. There's no way I could say I seen it in Keith. But I'm telling you, Gary, you got a great crew. They're both great guys. I love them to death. Keith was a huge addition, which helped us win a world championship. Ronnie was a huge addition, but you guys do have you, that's a good trio. I'm telling you right now, that's a great trio.
And Gary, that leads me into how long
Ron,
did it take to build the chemistry? I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say Ronnie says all the time that about Keith. This is not the guy I played with. he is he's a fascinating individual. He's got so many incredibly diverse interests, but he has changed a lot from the time he was a player. I think Ronnie probably less so because he was always that cerebral guy in the clubhouse who fit in a different kind of a way. um, we were thrown together in 2006, and none of us had really much experience doing what we were doing. I mean, I was coming from radio and really had not done much TV. So I had a lot of trepidations. Ronnie had done 1 year in Washington where he was kind of thrown in at the last minute and didn't have a whole lot of direction. And Keith had kind of dabbled over the previous few years, doing 15 games 1 year, 20 games another year, but never really took it seriously. So we were all kind of moving around in the dark and trying to figure out what we were supposed to do. And I think that might be the best thing that happened to us because we felt completely dependent on one another. And I think that we've been very fortunate in that, I'm working in a booth with a guy who should be in the Hall of Fame and a guy who won 99 games as a Met and was, one of the better pitchers of his generation. And there's no ego. I mean, and I think that served us well. We all did our thing, relied on each other, and there's enough common ground, but also enough differentiation between the three of us that it all sort of works. And I can't tell you beyond that why it works. It's just three personalities that mesh well, and we all love what we do and love the game. Well, Keith loves it most of the time, um, and we have fun, and it all seems to work.
Well, you let those two know tonight that you were my first guest between you three.
I will definitely be rubbing that in somebody's
Absolutely. I'll
face.
be watching the game.
Gary, do you have to prove yourself? I mean, you got two proven major leaguers, one borderline Hall of Famer, the other one solid career, Ron Darling, solid baseball career. You didn't play the game. I think anybody that had the same background as you, do you have to prove yourself to these two guys that, yeah, I didn't play the game, but I know the game real well? Did you feel like you had to prove yourself to them too?
No, not at all. I mean, I view the game from a different perspective. When you grew up playing and grew up watching from the dugout, you had a certain perspective on the game. I was always the kid in the upper deck, watching from a very different perspective, and I think I have a good feel about how fans watch the game and what people want to hear and want to know about the players. Um, so I'm not competing with Keith and Ron as far as baseball knowledge is concerned. I know the game the way I know the game. They know the game as players, and I think that's part of why it works. I'm not trying to be the hitting coach or the pitching coach. I'll leave that to them to assess their areas of expertise. My area of expertise is watching the game, knowing the history, knowing the rules, having a feel for the fans, and that's what I bring to the table.
One last broadcasting question for you, and then we'll wrap it up with a little bit on the current team. Len, just his last name, he was the broadcaster for the Chicago Cubs, the TV broadcaster.
Len Casper.
Right, Len Casper. He decides, I'm going to go over to the White Sox. When asked why, he said, because if I do TV, I'll never get a chance to do the playoffs and the World Series. But if I'm the radio guy, I will be in that booth. It doesn't look like the White Sox are going to get there anytime soon, but that's a different story. So, Gary, when you gave up the radio, you also gave up doing 9 innings of postseason baseball. How difficult of a decision was that for you?
It was the thing that stood the most in the way of me taking this job when I did. Um, it was weighing getting to do the postseason against 5 kids I had going to college, and college won out. So that's really, I'm being totally honest with you. That's why I took the job. I could have stayed in radio for the rest of my life. I consider myself a radio guy, and I adapt myself to television, but that's why I still do the Seton Hall games, just so I can still do radio. But missing the postseason is a big deal for me, and every time the Mets have gotten there since I started, I was fortunate. My first year on TV, they let me do an inning of each game on the radio. But since then, I have not had a chance to work the postseason other than participating in SNY's pre and post game shows, and it hurts. I think every TV guy will tell you the same thing. You follow the team all year. You're intimately involved in every game, and then the most important games come, and you're not participating. So it's a big deal, and it stinks.
You done a great job, Gary. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. And again, I'd love to have you on at a later date sometime if you have the time to do it. But I sincerely thank you.
Thank you, Wally. It's a real pleasure. It's great to see you, and I'm glad to see you doing well.
Well, you'll be happy that the weather has turned a little bit here in Arizona, Gary. So I hope you left the winter jacket home, but it's nicer, it's livable in the morning and in the evening. By the way, they're having an air conditioning problem over at the ballpark. So you might want to take a look at that before you go in for your dress, because I understand it's been a little stuffy in there for a couple of games.
Well, I'll take 110 over 120. That's okay. I can deal with
Yeah. By
110.
the way, could I make a case that the Diamondbacks are the best team in the National League?
They might be. I mean, considering they're missing three of their most important players right now, right? I mean, Christian Walker went down, Gabriel Moreno went down, and now Ketel Marte is out. I mean, for them to be doing what they're doing, but they had. It's funny how seasons work, right? They had stockpiled their best starting pitchers who weren't
Mm,
pitching, right? Merrill Kelly was out, Eduardo Rodriguez was out, and Jordan Montgomery was out, and they've all come back. And I know Montgomery has struggled, but having those guys without a lot of innings under their belt and now primed for the stretch run, you could certainly make the case that they're the best
yeah.
team.
It has been a great pleasure, Gary, to have you on. We appreciate the time you spent. Hopefully, you'll have a good road trip. The Mets will play solid, get back, hit September, and we'll see what happens the rest of the way. Can't thank you enough for your time.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks,
Thanks,
Wally.
Gary.
It's great being with
Thank
you.
you. All right, that's Gary Cohen, great broadcaster of the New York Mets. When we come back, we'll react to that. And also, we're going social. We're hitting the social media for your reaction and your questions and comments. It's 86, The Wally Backman Show.
So team effort. Do it.
All right, welcome back. It's 86, The Wally Backman Show. And Wally, I want to thank you again. I was a little nervous talking to Gary Cohen. I mean, to me, it's broadcasting royalty. But as always, he's got opinions, got a little background on the booth and how they constructed that. I really love that interview. So thank you for setting that up. And I'm sure all the fans who were watching and listening also thank you. And Wally has demanded that we set a good chunk of time aside for listeners. Now, folks, I'm going to run down a bunch of social media where you can get in touch with Wally. You can also get in touch with me. By the way, my name is Bruce Jacobs out of Phoenix. If you want to hit up Wally on X, it's Wally_Backman6. If you want to hit up Wally on Instagram, it's at Wally Backman 86. Email the Wally Backman Show at gmail.com. And you can also get us on YouTube at youtube.com/86'D. So 86. All right. And if you want to hit me up with an email, it's CHBR40 at gmail.com. So those are all our social media. And Wally loves to listen to get feedback from the fans, as do I. What do you got for us today, Wally? I do have an email as well. But what do you got for us? Something real
Well,
spicy, something good.
one of the big questions. I wish I could answer every question, and I know it's all based on time. But the question that I really wanted to talk about today was, a gentleman asked me, what was the difference when we got Gary Carter and Keith Hernandez? And the difference was Frank Cashin had a vision, our general manager, and he added pieces that needed to be added. And those were two positions that we needed to add. I mean, Gary, a veteran catcher, to be able to run a young pitching staff with Gooden and Fernandez and Darling and those guys, Rick Aguilar, all those guys. And for Keith to be able to control the defense on the infield. Keith can talk, and he's smart. He knew what he was talking about. I know that Keith goes back, and he'll tell you that when he got traded to the Mets, he didn't want to come there. Of course, he was leaving the Cardinals, a great organization at that time. But Keith made a huge difference for us. Gary made a huge difference for our pitching staff. And without either one of those guys, I don't know if we win a world championship. I mean, I know from 84 through all those years through 88, we were a good team. But without those two individuals, I don't know if we could have been a great team like we were.
Okay, Wally, I have one email, and to me, this is fascinating. I want to see what this is from John on Long Island. It doesn't say we're on Long Island, but that's okay, John. Appreciate it. And John says, I'd like Wally's thoughts about how that 86, that era underachieved. Even though we won one World Series, John states, we should have won more. So while he's grateful to have won that one World Series, he feels a little unfulfilled. Wally, I think this is a great email from John on Long Island. Your thoughts? Did that era of Mets underachieve?
I don't think we underachieved. I think we were great teams. You know, we were winning over 90 games. We won 99 games one year and didn't go to the playoffs. I think that the way that they have baseball set up today, there was a really good chance we could have won 3 or 4 World Series, I think. So with the wild card teams and things like that. So we didn't underachieve. Maybe some of those teams, the Cardinals won 100 and some games that year. We won 99, I think it was. Maybe they overachieved a little bit. But, you know, when you get close to winning 100 games, I can't believe you're underachieving. Sometimes it has to do with matchups, or sometimes it has to do with when you're facing a team, if they're hot or they're cold or whatever. But we won a lot of baseball games from 84 through 88.
Yeah. And you know, Wally, if Oral Hershiser hadn't dominated everybody else, including you guys in 88, it wasn't like he just dominated you guys and then struggled in the World Series. Then I might say I would agree. I think the Mets maybe should have, possibly put up one more banner. I think they had the team. But I will say I'm not upset about losing to Oral Hershiser. You hate to lose to a one-man operation, especially a pitcher. But, I mean, he dominated everybody else he saw, including in the World Series. So I really can't sit here and just bag on the Mets.
What people got to understand is when we went into that 88 season, we were playing the Dodgers in the postseason. We had beat the Dodgers 11 out of 12 times that year in the regular season. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, no, that's fact. And to go in and lose to them the way that we did, it was just, I was very, very disappointed. I know my other teammates were disappointed too, but we beat the Dodgers 11 out of 12 times in 1988.
Folks, every piece of social media that comes in is read. Some are aired. Again, if you want to get Wally on X, it's Wally_Backman6. On Instagram, it's at the Wally Backman. It's at Wally Backman 86. Excuse me. Email the Wally Backman Show at gmail.com. You can get me an email at chbr40@gmail.com. And yes, youtube.tv and ladies and gentlemen, /86'D. So it's 86. Those are all the social media accounts. Keep them coming in. I promise you, we pay attention to all of them, and the better ones will get aired. When we come back, it's Last Licks, and even a sickly Wally Backman who's fighting through congestion. He's all fired up for Last Licks. It's 86, the Wally Backman Show.
It's a fucking team effort. Do it.
All right, it's Last Licks, final segment. Great to have you aboard. 86, the Wally Backman Show. And ladies and gentlemen, you will hear from Mookie Wilson next week. And then in a couple of weeks, we have a commitment from Howard Johnson. So that'll be on the schedule for the next couple of weeks. At the end of the show, Wally and I like to get in our last shots. It doesn't have to just be taking shots. It could be praise. It's called Last Licks. Wally, you go first. Who's at the top of your Last Licks?
Well, I got a couple of them today. I just went back to New York for an autograph show and supposed to be there today and gone tomorrow. And I ended up all the rain, all the shit that happened there. I had to stay for an extra couple of days. When you only pack a suitcase for one extra day and you got to stay 4 days, you got to go buy some clothes. And it was a pain in the ass. It was miserable. Delta Airlines sucks because they couldn't get me on a flight for 2 more days. I
Did they
think
put you up in
my
a good
biggest-
hotel?
I paid for it. I stayed at the DoubleTree. So
Well, wait a second. You had
I
to pay
paid
for your
for
own
it.
hotel?
I had to. So the sponsor that is supposed to that did the autograph show, there was many of us there. So I would assume that he will take care of it. I'll send him some receipts. If they don't, they don't. But what a nasty trip that was.
Yeah. Do you get back for those trips often?
Do I what?
Do you get back for those kind of trips often? Card shows and sign in autograph?
I got to go back in September, and I
Yeah.
go back in October. So I go back for a few of them. A lot of them are with the 86 guys. I know the 12th and 13th of October is like an 86 reunion. It's in New Jersey. People can look it up online. But we have a lot of fun doing those things, and we've done them. We've stayed in contact with the fans of New York, and I think they really like that about us.
Yeah, I know they do, Wally. I know my father attended some of those. He's no longer with us, and he loved it. Those card shows and those signing and those autograph shows. It's good that you guys do that and stay in contact with the fans. And hey, it could have been
So,
worse, man. You could have slept on the floor of the airport for 24 hours.
I've got some information from people that really know me, and they're wondering why in the hell am I not saying different shit? But I'm going to say something. This is my last one for Last Licks. For 2 hours yesterday, I watched Jack Buck interview Roger Clemens, and then the second one was Pete Rose. And Roger Clemens impressed me. I hated him when I played against him, and New York probably hated him when he played against us for the Piazza thing and stuff. But to watch that show, the way his life, the way he was raised, it really impressed me. And Pete Rose, Pete's Pete, for God's sakes, leads Major League Baseball in hits. Who in the fuck are these writers that don't vote these guys in? You're going to tell me baseball, steroid issues. Well, it used to be alcohol. There's been an issue with everybody in the Hall of Fame, but for writers not to pick these two guys to be in the Hall of Fame, they should be ashamed of themselves.
Wally, I'm going to agree and disagree with you. I'm absolutely there with you on Pete Rose. I find it unbelievable that a guy who, now, if you show me proof that he bet against his team, different story. I'm not saying it's good to bet on your team, and you can certainly, drive some of your players. You can be using a certain pitcher more than you should because you need the win because you got the bet on the team. But I have to tell you, Wally, I'm a flat out no excuses. If you did steroids, you would never get my vote. And Roger Clemens is a slam dunk Hall of Famer without that junk. But as far as I'm concerned, guys like him and Bonds and a few others, no. And I feel no sympathy for them either. I do feel sympathy for Pete Rose, though.
Now you're thinking about all the stuff in the Mitchell report, but these guys were never convicted or they never proved that they used steroids. And we all know that we think they did. But if you take everybody out of the Hall of Fame that used amphetamines or steroids, there would be no Hall of Fame left.
Well, I tell you, folks, I could see Wally and I doing a large segment on this because time is short. I don't just disagree. I vehemently disagree. We'll save that argument for another time. I've got two for you, Wally. The first one is on me. I want to take a shot at myself, and I think you can certainly understand this. I had to, for the last two nights, actually root for the Philadelphia Phillies. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I jumped right in the shower. Okay, rooting for the Phillies is like eating castor oil with wrapped in spinach. Okay, I'd rather pound my head against the cement, but we need the Braves to lose. They played the Phillies, and so I have to resort to the bottom rung of Metdom, which is rooting, in my opinion, rooting for the Phillies. And I want to rag on myself first. You got any thoughts on that, Wally?
Hey, you know what? We've both basically been lifetime Met fans. I mean, I signed as a first round pick in 1977, a long time ago. So I was 17 years old. So I've rooted for them my whole time. So yeah, sometimes you got to root for the team that you don't want to win, but
Yeah.
for the Phillies to beat the Braves, that just gets us just a little bit closer.
All right, now the last one, and there's nobody who can work with this one better because you managing in different leagues, and you can talk about that too. The Atlantic League is almost like an experimental, a league. Wally, these new pitching rules that they're proposing. Now, I do want to tell you, I'm not strictly old guard. I'm hesitant for change. I kicked and screamed at the extra runner at second base. Now I think it's the greatest thing baseball has ever done. And there have been a few other times where I've kicked and screamed about the rule change proposals. I have to say, I will not be changing my mind on this. I think these new pitching rules where you're telling teams you have to use the pitcher for at least 6 innings or 100 pitches, and there are a few caveats, injury, ineffectiveness. But Wally, what is the purpose of baseball outside of maybe trying to shave a couple of more minutes to try to tell managers how to use their starting pitchers? I think this is outrageous.
It is totally outrageous. You know, I was in the Atlantic League for 5 or 6 years, uh, all the way up until coming into this year, and we were an experiment, from the larger bases to moving the pitch and mound back 6 inches or a foot, whatever it was, to have, and I call him the ghost runner at second base, which I actually like that part of it because it sped the game up. You know, when you get to the playoffs, you don't get to do those type of things, but some of these things are so off the wall that, you know, and it's not, and I don't like to criticize people that never played the game, but come on, fuck. You never played the game. You don't know how hard it is to move a mound back another fucking foot or whatever it might be. What that's going to do to a pitcher, what it's going to do to a hitter. We did it for the final 3 months in the Atlantic League a couple of years ago, and the data showed it really didn't make a difference, except it did make a difference because it's more strain on a pitcher's arm.
Yeah. And Wally, I got to tell you, man, the audacity of somebody sitting in an office, some Ivy League puke, sitting in an office with his little bow tie on, telling Wally Backman, no, you cannot remove this pitcher in the 4th inning at 72 pitches, even though Wally Backman's got somebody in the bullpen now ready to face Freddie Freeman or Acuna Jr., who's a better matchup, and you want to remove the pitcher, and you can't do it. That
Now,
is absolutely ridiculous.
here's the thing. All these new rules really went through the Atlantic League. Um, as a manager, front office person, you couldn't argue with anybody about these things because Major League Baseball paid the Atlantic League to use these new rules. So Major League Baseball had every hand in it that they could do whatever they wanted to do. And some of the rules are good rules. I'm not going to say they're all bad rules. The bigger base, it
Right.
proved that there's not as many injuries. So, but some of this stuff is just like some of this pitching stuff they're talking about now. Fuck, they got to be nuts.
I could see you, Wally. I could see you sitting in a dugout. You want to replace a pitcher because you got a pitcher who's a much better matchup. And as you well know from playing and managing, you know, the key spot in the ball game could be in the 4th inning. It doesn't always have to be in the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings. And there may be a matchup. The opponent could be on the verge of blowing you out. Your pitcher's okay. He's doing all right. But you've got a better matchup. And now some guy sitting in an office somewhere with his little bow tie with his Ivy League education is saying, Wally Backman, you cannot remove that pitcher. I tell you what, man, how does a guy like you just not absolute? How did you adapt in the Atlantic League, by the way? How did you adapt to it?
You know what, Bruce? I can't say what I really want to say about some of these people that are doing those things because it's probably
Yes, you
fair.
can.
I know I should say whatever I want, but they have
I
no
know.
fucking idea what they're talking about half the time. Not when it comes to
Yeah,
baseball.
I totally agree. I'll tell you, man, I would not, if I were a baseball guy like you, played the game and all that, managed the game, if some puke from Yale wanted to tell me that I can't take my pitcher out, I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Get out of here, man.
Baseball's a chess game for a manager. You move your pieces around. You put players in positions to succeed, and not in positions to fail. And what are they trying to do? They're taking that away from you as a manager, and that's why you win games when you can play a chess game with the other manager on the other side. And they're
Right.
trying to take some of that shit away from the managers.
Right with you. Wally, great show today. Gary Cohen, some good correspondence from the listeners. So we always appreciate that. Again, you can get Wally on X. It's Wally_Backman6. Hopefully you took a note on the rest of the socials. We're on email. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram. We're everywhere. He's Wally Backman. I'm Bruce Jacobs. Mookie Wilson next week. It's 86, the Wally Backman Show.